It says, we meet Christ often compelling us to the duty of secret prayer by His own example, as He had done by His precept, and always choosing for it the most private and retired places, to teach us to go and to do likewise, often to pray to our Father, which seeth in secret. And His example more presses us, because we have much more business with God in prayer than He had. Do you know what he means by that? Matthew Poole is saying, we have more business to do with God in prayer than Jesus. Why? He says, for this reason, Jesus had no sins to confess, nor to beg pardon for, no need to ask for any sanctifying habits of grace. Jesus lived a life of prayer, and frequently it was His custom to participate in hidden prayer with His Father, and yet He had nothing of the need that we have. He had no need of confessing sin. He had no pardon to beg. He had no need to cry out for grace upon grace and mercy upon mercy like we do. Now, I want to finish with an example from Jesus in Mark chapter 1. Mark chapter 1, verse 29. I'm just going to begin to read. And immediately after they came out of the synagogue, they came into the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was lying sick with a fever, and immediately they spoke to Jesus about her. And He came to her and raised her up, taking her by the hand, and the fever left her, and she waited on them. Then evening came, after the sun had set, they began bringing to Him all who were ill and those who were demon-possessed, and the whole city had gathered at the door. And He healed many who were ill with various diseases, and casting out many demons, and He was not permitting the demons to speak, because they knew who He was. In the early morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went away to a secluded place, and was praying there. Simon and his companions searched for Him. They found Him and said to Him, "Everyone is looking for you." He said to them, "Let us go somewhere else." Now, briefly, what I want to put before you is, first of all, what's going on here. He was teaching in the synagogue. He was dealing with the demonic. He comes in from there. And Mark is fond of using this word immediately. The book of Mark, if you read it properly, when you're done, you should be wore out. Because it's like snapshots of Jesus Christ and His activity. And there's no rest in it. Immediately. And so he says, immediately after they came out of the synagogue, they went to the house of Simon, and Simon's mother-in-law was sick, and He healed her. More virtue going out of Him. Then when evening came, after the sun had set, they began bringing to Him all who were ill, demon-possessed. The whole city had gathered. Now let me explain to you. So when evening had come, they did this. Why? It was the Sabbath. I'm reminded when they were giving out free land in Oklahoma and the West, how they put everyone on a line. And there were literally hundreds of men on horseback and carriages and all such, because the moment the gun went off, they were all going to race to try to find their land. And people died in the stampede. I want you to know that there on the Sabbath, thousands of people are waiting for the night to fall to make a Sabbath day journey, to make a journey to Him, to get to Him. And the moment it was proper, the moment it was time, the gun went off and the race began. Now, to give you an idea of what this is like, one time in the mountains of Santa Rosa, near the Pueblo Ayabaca, it's in the Andes Mountains, the people found out that I had brought a doctor with me. There were about 1,500 people there gathered for the Bible conference, and they discovered that I had brought a physician. Even though the physician had no medicine and they knew it, even though the physician had no tools to work with, and even if he had, he couldn't have done anything in that filthy place. You have never seen such a war break out in all your life. Not because they were evil people or bad people. They were desperate people. No physician had ever been there before. They were poor. They were broken. They had children who were dying and sick. Men with tuberculosis. Other men suffering. People who had cuts and wounds. And it just turned into a nightmare. They stormed the door of the hut. We moved up to the second floor. I had to stop preaching for 3 days. I translated for the doctor. Now I want you to realize what's going on here. You may think that Jesus is in a quiet little village and a few people come to Him to be healed. No, thousands of people. And they are violent, and they are angry, and they are pressing, and they are wanting to get in, and they are wanting to be healed, and He is working, and they are angry, and they are distraught, and they are afraid that their time is going to come and pass, and they're not going to see Him, and there's a battleground going on out there. It is a horrid scene, and if anyone has ever ministered, they would know that this type of thing will absolutely wear you out. Wear you out. Now, it says here, in this passage, it says that when evening came, after the sun had set, they began bringing them to Jesus. Now, look at verse 35. But in the early morning, while it was still dark. There's not a lot of time in between the two. There's not a lot of time. I would imagine that people were camped out all around the house. I would imagine that when Jesus went out of the house, He had to make His way. As He made His way through angry crowds at times that wanted to kill Him or wanted to make Him king, I believe He had to make His way through that crowd. Be very careful not to wake them up. And here is a man who has poured himself out. Did He grab any sleep at all, it seems? And then He arises to do what? To pray. Now, I have to be careful here because there is a great need for ministers to rest. There's a great need for ministers not to work themselves to the bone or to be involved in activities that will take them away from their proper activity of prayer and reading the Word and preaching. But I want you to see something here about the life of Jesus Christ. If any man had a reason to say, I've done enough. I've given absolutely everything I can give. It was Jesus. If there ever was a man who had a reason to say, Lord, I can't pray now. There's just too many hurting people that I still haven't touched. There's too much ministry to do. I don't have time to pray. If anyone ever had the right to say that, at that moment, it was Jesus Christ. I love what Martin Luther said one time. He said, I have so much work, activity to do today. I must pray at least 3 hours or I will never get done. That's the direct opposite of us, isn't it? I have so much to do today. I have no time to pray. Look what we're saying. We are saying with that declaration, I'm going to go out and accomplish things in the power of my own. Now Jesus goes out and look at this. I think, I may be reading into this a bit, but I think what we've got going on here is a guilt trip by Simon. Verse 36, Simon and his companions searched for Him and they found Him and they said to Him, everyone is looking for you. What are you doing out here? Don't you realize there's all these people? What are you doing out here in the dark, praying? Don't you know that everyone's looking for you? There are people out here that are hurting and they need you. Jesus never bought into that. He knew His priority was to be in the presence of His God. To seek the face of His God. To follow His God. And that the greatest thing He could do for humanity is the greatest thing you can do for humanity. To seek your God. For those of you who are in churches, maybe some pastors here. Sometimes I'm asked to go to churches and preach to churches that are looking for a pastor. I do a special thing on the way you should approach it. And I'll always sit down. I'll ask them to put a chalkboard or a whiteboard out in the front of the church. And I say, okay, what do you want your pastor to do? And they will come up with all sorts and manner of things that man should be doing. And then when they're all finished, and we've got about 68 hours of work each day lined out on that whiteboard, I say, now, how much time do you want that man in the Word? The souls of your children may depend upon how he preaches. How much time do you want that man in the Word? Now, next question. How much time do you want that man interceding, seeking the face of God so that he knows Him?